What's up guys, it's River and today we're looking at the DJI Pocket Osmo. It's hard to talk about this as just a camera because it is so much more. It is really a camera robot. What I love about this is that it gives everybody the ability to capture beautiful, breathtaking visuals in an easy and professional manner. If you're a content creator, this is a perfect tool. Or if you're just somebody that wants to capture their life in a beautiful fashion. So let's do a deep dive, see exactly what this does, exactly what it's capable of, if it's right for you, and of course, is it better than the GoPro? Let's get into it. Also, there's a link in the description down below for the absolute best pricing on this camera, so be sure to check that out. So before we talk about any technicals or specs with this camera, what we really have to discuss is the fact that it has a built-in 3-axis stabilized gimbal. As you can see, this camera is staying perfectly smooth. As I kind of roll around, I can tilt up and down, and with that comes something called face tracking. You can literally get this to lock onto your face or someone else's face, and it will actually pan with you, track up and down. It will just follow you around. It is almost like having your own camera crew. And this extends to other subjects as well. You can track cars, you can track animals, you can just track any kind of fast-moving object, and it does a very, very good job. And along with that, the two other features that really excite me about this camera are the motion time-lapse and the panorama mode. When you set this camera to motion time-lapse, you can literally give it a path to follow and it will make a time-lapse over an hour, 8 hours, a day, whatever have you, as long as the battery doesn't die. Normally, if you do that with a DSLR, you need several $1,000s worth of equipment, but this thing does it all for $399. On top of that, it has something called a panorama feature. Normally, you have to take your cell phone and you carefully get this huge wide landscape shot, but this does it in one click. Let me demonstrate. And just like that, with the click of a button, you have a panorama. It's 48 megapixels because it stitched 4 photos together. Normally, that is very tough to do, and it did all of that for you in under 30 seconds. As for the camera, it's only 12 megapixels, but it still gives you 4K photos. So given the smaller sensor size and the lower megapixel count, it's not quite as good as a DSLR, which is normally 24 or 30 megapixels. However, this camera does give you DNG RAW, which is a RAW format. So while you may not get the same resolution and pixel count as a DSLR, you will still have the same flexibility in editing as a DSLR. So I would really think of this as a really, really, really fancy phone camera. And of course, the panorama feature in this thing makes it much more attractive for photo shooters. Now, video is really where this thing shines. If you're gonna get this thing, it really should be for video first. As for video, it does standard HD and 4K up to 60 frames per second, so you do get a nice bit of slow motion. But if you want super slow motion, it has a separate feature called super slow motion, obviously, where it lets you do HD up to 120 frames per second. And all of this is backed up with a super smooth 3-axis cinematic gimbal. Now, this camera on its own is nothing really to write home about. It's probably as good as an iPhone 10, not even an iPhone 11. But with that gimbal, you get buttery, smooth, professional looking footage. You can track subjects, even fast moving ones. It has a fast follow mode. But just overall, your videos will just look better and more professional because of that gimbal. And of course, if you are looking to do cinematic work with this, it does have a cinema profile built right in, which brings me perfectly to my next point, dynamic range and color science. So the colors right out of the camera with nothing done in just the standard mode are pretty neutral and nothing to write home about, but that's okay. I want them to be neutral and standard because for me personally, I'm gonna take the images and videos straight from the camera, right into my phone, edit them on Instagram, Adobe, VSCO, whatever you want to use, and put them straight up on Instagram. And I think I prefer this to have that really neutral look so I can just edit it on my phone. If you're someone that wants to take the footage, bring it onto your laptop and professionally edit it, it does have something in it called Cinema Like D, which is DJI's cinema profile, and it gives you so much dynamic range. With Cinema Like D, you can easily intercut this with a Sony camera, a Canon camera, a Panasonic. There is no issue. I really appreciate that cinema profile. It makes it completely possible for you to use this as a B cam with your Canon DSLR, Sony camera, or a Panasonic. It works great as a B camera. Overall, I would say I'm very impressed with the color science and the image quality out of this camera. If you're just someone that's looking to capture your life beautifully, you will not be sorry. And if you're a professional, this is a very good B cam. So the autofocus in this camera is kind of hit and miss. The face tracking is very spot on, and I figured the autofocus would do the same, but I've noticed in several cases the camera wouldn't track to my face for focus and it would track to something behind me. For whatever reason, it tends to favor wider shots than close-ups, so that's kind of a weird thing. But I still think it's a good autofocusing system as long as you use your phone and you can just kind of use that bigger screen to make sure that you're in focus, you will be just fine. Overall, the autofocus features in this camera aren't really anything to write home about. I would just make sure that you monitor your focus, make sure your face is actually in focus. The one tip that I do have, I would use this camera only in single focus mode. When it's in continuous, it tends to hunt quite a bit. In single focus mode, it picks a thing and just sticks to that for autofocus. And I find the autofocus is much more reliable in single focus mode. Next, let's talk about low light in this camera. It's a bit of a mixed bag. The max aperture on this camera is f2, which lets in plenty of light, and it's clean up to 1600 ISO. But because of that smaller sensor size, the camera is physically limited by the amount of light that it can capture because it's simply a smaller sensor. But for the most part, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you will be just fine. If you shoot at 1/50th of a shutter speed, you should get pretty decent results. It's only a problem when you shoot in slow motion where you have to crank up your shutter to 120 or 200 that you'll start to notice that you can either sacrifice your image quality or your noise levels. So it's not the best if you're trying to shoot slow motion in low lights. And if you're not a professional, don't even worry about it. You probably won't even notice the noise level. This is just for us camera nerds who like to pixel peep. And all of that brings me perfectly to the design aspects. So this thing is pretty tiny. It comes in a leather case, pops out, and it looks pretty well built. It has a nice sandpaper finish on the back. It has a nice little rubber grip right here for your thumbs, although it's not slippery or anything, so I can't imagine this like just slipping out of my hands. The only real objection I have with the design of this is it kind of looks like a toothbrush. I was actually at a party last night filming with this, and someone's like, why'd you bring your toothbrush to the party? I'm like, oh no, it's my camera. And then funny enough, another person was like, oh, I had one of those things. It broke because I put it in my backpack without the case, which kind of makes sense. For $399, I don't expect this to be like the most hardcore, well-built thing. $399, it's pretty cheap, but you know, this leather case is pretty good, and I feel like if you just keep it in this leather case, this thing will last you a very long time. But if you're the type of individual that always has their phone screen broken or their phone screen just always cracked no matter how many phones they go through, you know who you are. You probably want to pass on this because you will probably end up breaking this, but I don't know, maybe let's buy a couple of these. Overall, everything on this camera is very, very well built, and I really recommend using this camera with a phone to monitor everything, but it does have a little LCD screen right there to control and monitor everything, although that screen is more like a calculator screen. You really cannot tell critical focus. You really can't judge exposure based off of that. And a quick pro tip, this is kind of a design flaw, but the opening for the mic is right here, and there's one right here. You can accidentally block this with your thumb when you're pressing buttons, so you want to be super careful not to ruin your audio. Although if you were a vlogger, I really recommend using this with an external mic, and we'll talk more about that later. And next, let's talk about software. And the way to get the best software experience out of this camera is to actually connect it to your smartphone. When you connect it to your smartphone, you open up something called the DJI Mimo app, and you actually use this as your camera and this like your smartphone monitor thing. But it kind of makes it the same experience as using your smartphone, but you know, you get way better image quality out of this. The software is really easy to use. If you know how to use a smartphone, you know how to use this app. It has photo mode, panorama, video. You can change your settings easily just from the side, and overall, I would say the software is very, very good. It's about as easy to use as Canon software, and Canon software is a dream to use. If you're someone that struggles with weird, complicated menus, you will not have that problem here. Software-wise, I am very, very impressed with this. Overall, the software and the app experience on this is good enough for professionals and everyday people. You will not be disappointed. As for audio, it's an interesting situation. If you're someone that's just shooting for yourself, it's not for anything professional, you will be just fine. The audio isn't too tinny and it will pick up your voice just fine. Just you have to make sure to be aware of the mic input right here and the mic input right here. However, if you're a professional vlogger, you should and you must get an external mic. To get an external mic into this, you actually have to buy a $53 attachment that goes to the bottom and lets you plug in a 3/4 20 jack from any standard mic. I personally didn't get one because I don't plan to do a lot of vlogging with this. Plus, it was $399 already. I didn't want to spend another $53. But the external audio situation with this camera should be just fine. And here we are on a fairly busy, trafficy street. So right before the traffic comes in, this is what the audio is like, and I would expect pretty decent results, but I'm sure that as soon as I get close to the traffic, the audio will start to go in and out. But again, I think 98% of people will have pretty decent results with this. It'll just be the pro vloggers that probably need to get an external mic. Let me know in the comments down below how you guys find the audio and if you would use it. Overall, I think this is a fantastic camera. I would give it like a 9.2, 9.4 out of 10. The only thing that I wish was different, the camera itself is perfectly fine, but I wish the base was a little bit wider for a bigger battery, a bigger screen. And other than that, I think this is a very, very good camera. And now we're gonna ask the big question, is it better than a GoPro? Simple answer, yes. I would go with the GoPro if I was in a situation where there was a lot of sand, dirt, this thing was gonna get banged around a lot. GoPros are bomb-proof. There's this really famous article where someone took GoPro to the Middle East, it caught on fire, everything melted, but the GoPro was still working. GoPros are tanks. However, I think you will get much more cinematic footage, much more interesting footage out of this thing. The gimbal just makes it way more stable. So once again, if it's a rugged environment, definitely the GoPro. For everything else, DJI Pocket Osmo. So last but not least, who is this camera really for? To be honest, it's hard not to recommend this camera. If you're someone that just wants to capture their life in a beautiful fashion, definitely get this. You will not be disappointed. You are going to have a ton of fun. If you're a solo content creator, if you're a vlogger, a health or fitness person, just someone that wants to capture content for their business or blog, you will be very happy. You'll be able to create really professional level content with this without having to hire another camera guy. Be able to do a lot of it yourself, and this is a very, very good purchase for $399. And lastly, if you're a professional, if you're a wedding person, a corporate person, even cinematic filmmaker, this is a great, great B camera. I don't know if I was a professional, I could use this as my main camera, but this would be a fantastic B camera. And if I didn't want to have to bother with like bringing a gimbal to put a second DSLR on, this would be fantastic. I would happily do all of my stable or handheld shots with the DSLR, and I would use this for all my crane shots, all my weird movement shots. And also, because of the size of this thing, you can get this in places that you just could not get a DSLR. You can really like push it through things, push it through railings, get it nice up and close to things that you normally could not. You could hang this out the side of a car, whereas with the DSLR, it might slip out of your hand. This thing can do a lot of action cinematic shots that normally a DSLR would have to be rigged up with a bunch of stuff to do. This is a very, very good camera. And also, the one weird thing that I really like about this, if you're someone that wants to do car shots where you mount the car to your camera, normally it's hard to do that with the DSLR. This would be very easy to do. Honestly, you wouldn't even need a car mount. I could just get a bunch of duct tape, stick it to the hood of my car, and I would be good. This thing is surprisingly intuitive to use, and it's like a kind of a hidden gem for cinematic filmmakers. Could do a lot of interesting stuff with this. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us on a review of the DJI Pocket Osmo. This thing was an absolute pleasure to review, so if you are interested in this camera, make sure to check out the link down below. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave me a like and a comment down below. It really helps me figure out what kind of content you guys are vibing with and what I should be making going forward. And of course, if you have any questions about this camera whatsoever, hit me up in the comments down below. I love talking to you guys. I love answering questions. It's been a pleasure interacting with the community. As always, like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.